2018 and been a very active Zoom room helper probably the last 3 years, spent many thousand hours in here, and also do commercial and paid support as well for many shows across the nation. Today we're going to talk a little bit about FPP as a player, and we're just going to get into the basics of that. There are some other classes coming up in the next couple of weeks. Next week being the holiday, there will not be a class. The week of the 12th, one of our other Zoom room helpers, Rick Harris, will be talking about the new upcoming FPP 7 and the differences in FPP 7 that will be released this year. And then the following week on the 19th, we will have a class on FPP Advanced, where we'll go over some other advanced features and things you can do with FPP if you choose to. But tonight, we're just going to keep it to the basics and just player functionality and how you can quickly and easily get FPP set up as a player for your show if you would like to use that as a player. I'm going to share my screen and get my xLights up here real quick and talk a little bit about the setup that I've got set up that we're going to kind of go through here today. My home lab has quite a bit of stuff in it, but what I've done, I've set up a dedicated show network here that has these elements. So basically the computer that I'm using right now that I'm presenting from is wirelessly connected to a Wi-Fi router, just like you might have at home. And then I have one FPP device that's set up as a remote device, a little Pi Zero down here that's outputting to a ColorLight card on a P10 panel. And I've got some sequences prepared that will kind of show the sequences, and then we'll play them with FPP so you can kind of see what it looks like when you output from xLights as well as when you play from FPP. Also connected to this wireless router, I've got like a dedicated network switch here for my quote show. And I've got a controller. In this case, I'm using a Matos Dragon 8-port controller, but this could be a Falcon, could be an xLights, it could be a Hinks Pix. This is just a representation of a standard bridge mode type controller. And we have 3 models currently plugged into that. I've got a couple of NSR trees and a Spiral X tree. So this is a pretty small show setup, but it will demonstrate the major components to use FPP as a player. Now on the left, I've got a Raspberry Pi 3. Sitting over here, this is going to be a player, and he's going to be player only, and he'll be the master that will send network data through the switch to the Dragon controller for these trees. And then he'll send multi-sync commands from the player up through the wireless router to get to the other FPP remote and output to the LED panel. I've also got a camera set up. Let me see if I can get this to spotlight. Get my camera on. Maybe if I stop sharing for a minute. And let me see if I can spotlight for everyone. So don't pay attention to the complete mess, but I also set up my phone with the camera. So you'll be able to see these models in live action. So when we play from FPP, you can see that FPP is actually outputting and playing on these models. Go back to my shared screen. Can everyone still see my shared screen and my little map I put together here?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Just want to make sure my camera from the other account wasn't overlapping it. So in xLights, I've got these controllers configured. Here's the Dragon controller. Don't pay any attention to this red. I use host names. You can use IP addresses. If you have a dash in the host name, it shows up red because it might be suspect, but don't pay any attention to that. It works just fine. Then I have my other FPP set up with LED panels. And then normally I would say that the player would not be on this list because this is a list of controllers that directly control. But if you happen to hit discover, then it will find it and add it. In the newer xLights, if you do have your main player in here, you want to configure it on this right-hand side to be configured as an FPP player only. So when your player is listed here, If you configure as player only, you notice he will occupy 0 channels. If he shows up and you don't configure it as a player, he will occupy a channel, and you might have channel conflicts with other controllers. So just be mindful. I'm just demonstrating that the player can be in here, because if you hit discover, it will show up. My layout that we talked about, I got my trees and my little LED panel over here. And I happen to have this blinding lights sequence that evidently I closed. I've got 2 sequences here that I've mapped over that we'll play with, and then upload into FPP. So I'm going really quick through this section, because I figure a lot of you are probably already familiar with xLights. So I'm going to go ahead and output to lights just from this sequence and hit play. And we should see, I'm not sure I shared with audio, but I'm going to turn audio to silent. So you see that if you're looking at my camera view that's spotlit, you can see the actual models going. So the sequence plays directly. It is playing directly to the trees through the Dragon controller and directly through the LED panels as that FPP remote device, but it's sending data live to that panel. That's just how, when you output to lights, it sends the data directly from xLights, not actually played through FPP. Either that or routers, or his IPs configured in this host file or someplace else. I do not use host file. In my setup, I do DHCP on everything, and I have a dynamic DNS server. So when devices register with DHCP, their host names automatically get registered. So I saw those questions in chat there.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yep. Not something I would always recommend for everybody, but
Yeah,
I move my lab around and change things up quite a bit, move things to different networks all the time. And then that way I just talk to things by a name instead of by IP addresses, because I don't always know what the IP address is. My recommendation is likely for most standard shows is to use actual IPs. We can talk more about that. We'll be given a networking class like later, probably, I think it's the first part of August, that we'll talk about basics of networking as it relates to our shows. So that will be a topic. Watch for that post in the official xLights support forum. Any other questions right now on the basic setup and kind of what I have positioned here? That's just kind of the quick overview of standard small little show. Okay, chat, I see one coming up there. Network class is August 9th, John says. Yep. Thank you, John. So talk a little bit about controller configuration. So one reason I did want to have a second FPP in here, we won't talk about the LED setup today. When we're done with the class, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. But since we're going to focus on FPP as a player, then we'll just not get into the details of the LED setup on the color light. But I did want to represent it in this show because there are some configuration differences. If you have most standard controllers that you're going to send data to over the network, such as this Matos Dragon, a Falcon, Experience Lights, all those that traditional network-based controllers, in xLights, we definitely want this active configuration type to be set to active. Active means your player is going to send live network data to that device, right? There are other choices available here, such as inactive, for like if this controller is not used at all, or there's xLights only. And we'll talk about xLights only here as we move on to my FPP panel setup. You'll notice on the FPP panel, this active setting is already set to xLights only. Any controller that is either your FPP player, in the event that you're using an FPP combination, like a Culp controller that has controls of the lights as well as using that as the player, or if it's going to be an FPP remote, you must set this active setting to xLights only. So for an FPP remote, or if it's your FPP player / controller combination, it needs to be set to xLights only. Because when we get to the FPP Connect Upload utility, it's going to configure your player to send data to your other controllers. And if this guy was set to active, then he would play the local sequence and also receive data over the network, and you're going to have mixed results that you're not going to expect. So that's one key when we get into the FPP Connect. Make sure that your FPP remote devices are set to xLights only. All other standard controllers that you are going to send data to will be set to active. I think I beat that conversation. That's enough of that conversation. So the next thing is talking through these controller configurations. Oh, in case you care, here's my visualizer. I got port 1 has the tree and the star. Port 2, the right tree and the star. Port 3's got my spiral X on it. So super easy. The LED panels visualizer, I've got my matrix defined as a 2x2 P10 that is assigned to the
Sorry.
No, you're good. So the magic sauce happens in a tool called FPP Connect. So under tools, then FPP Connect. So we leverage xLights as our authoritative source of what's connected where, using the visualizer and the auto upload, the auto layout configuration and all that. But FPP Connect is what you use in order to send that information to your FPP player and FPP controllers. So in this case, you can see it discovered 2 FPPs, my main Pi, which is my player, and then the test Pi, which is the remote. We'll talk about some of these settings that I'm actually going to not upload right now because I wanted to show you something on the FPP webpage. So for your player setting, so whatever you have check marked over here on the left is what you're going to upload to. These are going to be your upload targets. So if you are running FPP remote controllers, like this one with my LED panels, you do want to upload sequences to your player as well as any FPP remotes. Your player is what's going to play songs. So your media is only going to be check marked on your master player is going to play the audio. Your remotes, you would not want to upload the media to. The model setting, these you can upload your xLights models to these controllers for individual model testing from FPP. I choose to usually leave that as none, but you can certainly choose to upload your models as well if you'd like to have those available for display testing. I do most of my model testing directly from xLights. But another most critical setting is this UDP output. You'll notice a difference here. UDP output is what's going to configure your player to send network data to your other controllers. So by default, this is set to none. But if you want this player to send data to your other controllers, like the Dragon that we talked about, right? So the player is going to send the data to the Dragon. Then this UDP out needs to be all, and that's going to configure the channel output page on FPP so that your output page is configured with the correct settings as defined in xLights. Normally you would then check mark your sequences that you have in this show directory. I just got 2 sequences, and then you'd hit upload to upload. I'm going to cancel that for just a brief second. And I want to go to my main player, and I'm going to open the web page for the main player. So this we're looking at right now is your initial setup page. So this main player right now is in a state as if I just imaged a card, brand new, just installed FPP, got it up, powered up. I connected it to my network. I can access it through the browser, but I still have no configuration at all. So this is the initial setup page you're going to have. This class specifically, I'm not talking about how to install FPP. I will say there are several videos that we've done. This is a GEMS video from last year about using FPP, about setting up FPP with the Raspberry Pi imager. So I'm going to copy this video and throw that in chat for anybody who wants it. Pi video. Boom. And this is like a 10-minute real quick, and it talks about using the Raspberry Pi imager and using the FPP image, burning it onto your SD card. This is like a quick 10-minute video. There's another video that there are several videos out there on FPP. Just make sure you're looking at videos that are reasonably current, like within the last year, last couple months. If you find something that's multi-years old, the methods that are used in the video may not be current. So this is about installing FPP 6, and this is like about 50 minutes long and goes through a lot of detail on getting installation and stuff. So rather than repeat all of that, I'm just going to throw that in chat here if anybody wants it to. Boom, there it is in chat. So since there's a lot of material out there already for installing FPP, I'm not going to worry about walking through the actual installation. I got my Zoom bars in the way here, stand by. Okay, so on my main player here, this is a fresh image. Got it powered up. I'm in the initial setup. I'm going to leave it at the player mode. Normally, the host name will just be FPP. I gave it a host name. Make sure each FPP device has a unique host name. Spaces are not allowed. Hyphens are. Whether you share statistics or not, that's a choice. There's anonymous statistics that it's going to upload. They really help the developers to understand like what version everybody's running, how you have it configured, and what features people are using. Set the locale to be USA. That's where I happen to live. This is network attached already. So I'm just going to hit look up time zone, and it's going to give me my correct time zone, America, Chicago, Central Time. I'm going to go ahead and look up location, and that's going to find my rough latitude and longitude based upon my public IP address. And that's helpful in scheduling. When we talk about scheduling, if you wanted to use sunrise, sunset, dusk, or dawn, then it will be the correct time based upon your geography on your longitude and latitude. So lookup location helps define those scheduling shortcuts, such as sunrise, sunset, dusk, and dawn. So, because that's going to be different in my location than it would be in, say, Denver or Sacramento or anywhere else, right? In the initial setup, you do have to choose like a UI password. Our standard recommendation is disabled. If you enable the UI password, it'll ask for a password every time you come to UI, and some upload features won't work from xLights properly. So our normal recommendation is disabled, and set the OS password. I always choose the default OS password that's well known. If you wanted to set a different OS password, you could set a custom OS password. I encourage you to make sure you remember it, because if we do have to get in under the covers of FPP to fix a problem, we're going to need that OS password. So my standard recommendation is leave it default. Once those are all set, you can hit finish setup. And then you cannot get past that initial setup page until you go through that process. You have to have those 2 password options at the bottom. You have to make a choice there before you can get past the initial setup page. Because of some of the things I set up, it wants to restart FPPD. So you could get a reboot flag or a restart flag. Whatever you get in this header banner, just go ahead and let that restart. FPP just restarted. It's up and running back on MainPy. To walk through this a little bit, just to show this is blank, I'm going to go to File Manager. There are no sequences. There are no audio files. There are no images, no effects. Everything's empty. I'm going to go to Input, Output, Channel Outputs. You'll notice that there are no E131 or DDP outputs configured. Pixel strings is blank because I have no cape on this one. LED panels is blank, and other is blank. So this is a completely blank FPP player right now. We're going to do all of the configuration from xLights. So we'll come back and look at this once we do the FPP upload and see what choices that we made in xLights and how that affects the FPP. Quick stop for a moment for any other questions or anybody got any comments, questions, or anything as we're moving along here. Nothing heard. Of course, feel free to post questions in chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that. Other moderators that are in here will be watching chat as well, and they'll bring my attention if somebody does have a question. All right, so now back in xLights, we're going to go ahead and configure now that that's set up. And if you really care, I'm going to open my other FPP device. You can see he is set in remote mode down here at the bottom. He's already set up in remote mode. If I take a look at his channel outputs, LED panels, you can see it's properly configured. I can do a test pattern. and you see the test pattern in my camera view, you can see the test pattern actually show up on the panels. So that guy is just previously configured. I'm not going to do anything with him at this point. Too many zoom bars. I got to move out of the way to get back to my tab. All right, so let's go ahead and configure the player from xLights. So we're going to do that through Tools, FPP Connect. All right, so we're going to upload to both because I wanted to put sequences on the test by 0 as well. UDP out set to all. I'll talk a little bit about these check marks. Since this is a player, this really doesn't do anything, right? This check mark doesn't matter. This is just what's configured in xLights. If you have a controller that has a hat or cape configuration check marked, then when I upload from here, it will update the output definition for that controller to make sure he always matches xLights. So I always recommend, if you do have a controller like this guy who's driving my LED panels, leaving that check marked so that the start channel on that controller will always be configured appropriately according to what xLights says. Down here on the sequences, if I right click anywhere down here, we get a little menu, right? So I can select all sequences. I can clear selections. If I had a whole bunch of sequences, I could pick and choose 5 or 6. I can right click and say select highlighted. Also, I recommend sorting by modified date. You can sort by name, but I sort by modified date, and I do a reverse sort. So the newest is always on top. So that way, if you've got 30 or 40 sequences in this folder, you can always find the newest one on the top. Pay attention to this modified date and make sure that matches what you think it should be. In this case, my Light of Christmas was modified on June 26th, and my Blinding Lights was last modified on June 22nd. So that seems about right to me because that's when I was preparing for the class. So that's right. If this was like a January, then I know that this is not my most current version of the sequence. So I'm going to upload both of these sequences to both of these FPP devices and hit upload. And it's going to go through and compute the FSEQ and upload all the MP3s to the player, then upload the sequences to both. And that's done. Cool. I'm going to flip back to the FPP here, and I'm going to refresh my web browser. And you'll notice now from my status page here, I now can see both of these sequences are there and choosable. From this status page, you can play a playlist or you can play an individual sequence. I'm going to pick this individual sequence, and I'm just going to go ahead and play temporarily, make sure he's all working with what I expect. And I don't think my audio source is turned on right now. I'm going to get up real quick and go hit my speaker. And you guys are going to get to see me in the camera. Oh, it is on. And I know why. So it's playing the sequence, but no audio, and I'm not seeing anything on the LED panels. Right. So purposely, I don't see anything on the LED panels right now because I want to talk about that next. So it's kind of working, but not completely working, right? So let's stop. Let's address audio first. So my speaker is on, but I didn't hear any audio. Now I happen to notice on this main Pi, I'm using a Sound Blaster sound card. So this is the player. So I'm going to have to go into FPP settings, status control, FPP settings, go to the audio video. And by default on a Raspberry Pi, he's going to use the audio device for your onboard audio. That's not what I'm using. I'm using a Sound Blaster Play 3. I have to choose that sound card to be the sound card to use. When I make that change, it does have to reboot for that to occur, but I'm not going to reboot just yet because there's one other thing I want to check, because I noticed it was not playing on my LED panels. And Bill, I just noticed in chat, FSEQ type in FPP Connect. So I will come back and visit that just briefly. So because I have that set up as an FPP remote, we need to make sure that the player is going to send the multi-sync commands to tell the remote to start and stop and all that. So we're going to configure that under status control multi-sync. And here it discovered, this is my Dragon down here at IP. There's nothing to really do here. I got my test pi 0 and I've got my main pi, which some reason shows 2 IP addresses, but I'm not too worried about that. But under settings from this multi-sync page, send multi-sync packets is the send multi-sync packets is what is needed for this player to send the multi-sync packets to other FPP remotes. So once I check mark that, it's going to ask me to restart. Go ahead and let this reboot, and then I'll address these 2 questions. It's rebooting. Just because it's what I do, I'm going to watch this guy reboot by doing a continuous ping to him. If I can actually type. So he won't respond at first, but then he'll start responding when he comes back up. So we'll know when he's back up. So FPP Connect, the quick question on FPP Connect sequence type. FPP Connect. As a general rule, and Rick hit the nail on the head. If you guys heard that, my speaker is announcing the IP addresses that Pi rebooted. So I know the audio is working now because he just announced his IP address. So you have different sequence types that you can upload to controllers. V1, V2, V2 sparse, ZSTD, which is a compression type, and then V2 sparse uncompressed. By default for FPP devices is going to be a V2 sparse. If you had different controller types that supported an FPP Connect upload, then the default type might be different. We recommend always V2 sparse compressed because that's going to save the most space on your SD card, and it's going to give the FSEQ will have just the channel data needed based upon this device output. So since this guy is doing UDP out all, he will have channel data for any controller that is set to active. In my case here in this demo, that's my Dragon controller. So he'll have all the channel data for the Dragon controller as part of that V2 sparse sequence type. For the remote, that's just my LED panels only. So with him being V2 sparse, he will only contain the channel data necessary for those LED panels. There's no need for the remote that's driving LED panels to have channel data for my trees that's on a completely different controller, because this guy's never going to send that data anyway. So it's a way of having smaller, more concise, more efficient FSEQ files that only contain the data necessary for the specific controllers. Now, there may be some specific use cases where if you're having a problem or depending on your exact scenario with what controllers you have, we may have you choose to do more of a V2 to have the full FSEQ, but those are kind of edge cases. That's not really typical. V1 you never want. So like a sequence I have here might be 400, it might be like 300 megabytes in size for a relatively large sequence. If I did that as V1, it might be 3 gigabytes in size. V1 is almost never used in the FPP Connect utility. And Paul T answered about the Sound Blaster. Yes, the Sound Blaster Play 3 is a USB sound card that is plugged into the Pi. It has a better audio processor than the onboard, so you might get clearer, more audible audio. Anyway, I'm going to cancel out of this FPP Connect, and my main Pi is back up and running again. We can see my ping is pinging nonstop. I'm going to cancel that. Blinding lights, I'm going to hit play again. So I don't have the sound turned up very loud, but maybe you guys can hear a little bit of sound in the background. My microphone might be picking it up, but you can see I have the LED panels playing now, and I got LED panels and trees playing for this sequence. So this is now playing from FPP and playing through my audio speaker I have plugged into my Pi, not playing from my computer at all. So we're successfully playing sequences from FPP. And then you go ahead and choose this Light of Christmas. no comments on the mapping. I just quickly mapped this over onto these trees and tried to put like snowballs on the ornaments on the Spiral X. And there are multiple versions of this sequence over the time. So while it's playing, I'll draw your attention here. You have an elapsed time and a remaining time. Randomized doesn't matter right now because we're just playing the individual sequence. But you can see how far along it is and how much is left. And you can see down here any detail of what's actually playing. Ha ha ha. Ho, ho. Another way to install without the need to download. Alex has a YouTube video on that. Alex, is that actually installing the image from the Raspberry Pi repository?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. Greg from Panel Server stated a few months back.
So for Raspberry Pis, the good call, and that was not available when we did the video last year on the Raspberry Pi Imager. For Raspberry Pis, the standard production images are now available. When you go through Choose OS on Raspberry Pi Imager, you can go down to Other General Purpose OS. Nope, that's not the one. Excuse me, pardon me. Other Specific Purpose OS. And scroll down through here a little bit and you see FPP is now included in the operating system list for the Raspberry Pi Imager. So you can pick FPP, pick your specific version. Right now, only the Pi images are available. I know there's an effort underway to get the BeagleBone images into this repository also. So I can just pick this OS and then pick my storage card, which I don't have any in right now. Then I could write that without ever having to do a download. Good call, Alex. Thank you for bringing that up. And this is why we are now kind of recommending the Raspberry Pi Imager as an imaging utility. We may have used Balena Etcher in the past, .NET Imager, Win32 Disk Imager. Those are all disk imaging softwares that will allow you to burn an image onto an SD card. Those all still work, just the Raspberry Pi Imager is super easy. And if you want to save the quick part of the video, if you come back here and set up Other Specific OS to get the one from the repository, you can choose Custom. And that brings up your file selection on your computer. So here you can see I got many different images available, like the 7.0 beta images for both Pi and BeagleBone. Yes, this utility will burn the BeagleBone images just as well as the Pi images. Just make sure you're using the correct image for the correct hardware that you have, such as Pi or BeagleBone. All right, thanks, Alec, for that reminder. So we have our sequences here. We're playing successfully. We're getting audio. We're getting our remote going. One other thing I wanted to go ahead and bring up, and just so that the audio is not bothering anybody, I'm going to turn the volume down. And I want to play. So when it's playing, and earlier we didn't see anything on the LED panels, but while it's playing, if you go to Status Control Multisync, you're able to see all of your FPP devices down here in the bottom where it says Auto Refresh Stats. If I turn this on, I can see that my main player is playing Blinding Lights with the audio, and he's at the 21-second time marker. And then my remote is playing Blinding Lights FSCQ at the 28-second mark. So these guys are always going to be in sync. It may look like they're a fraction of a second off at times, but it'll sync back up. So this is a good status page when you're playing with multiple FPP devices from a player. You can actually see right from this multi-sync page the status of what's going on with your other FPP devices. Oh, this 3154, the Genius is just discovered twice in here right now. So this is actually the Genius. You see it showing up in bridge mode. It may be version of firmware I'm running right now that I don't know, not sure why it shows up twice, but you can see the same IP address twice. All right, cool. We'll go back to the status control status page, and I'm going to stop this playing.
What about the checkbox on that status or the multi-sync page? Right, because there's different types of multi-sync that you can do.
Yeah, you mean over here on this checkbox?
Nope, on the left.
Yeah. So when you have a remote So I want to hit settings. So remember we had to turn on the send multi-sync packets on the player. So he'll send, by default, he's going to send those packets using the network multicast method, which is kind of like addressing mail to the neighborhood. And so he's going to send those commands out on the network for anybody who's listening. So any FPP remote is going to listen and receive those. If you have trouble where like your remote's not responding correctly, then the checkbox up here next to any remote that's right next to his IP address, this will configure what's called unicast. When I check that on, you can see having unicast check when multicast is enabled, that's discouraged. So if you're going to do unicast, then I'm going to uncheck multicast down here at the bottom. And what that does, that says send the multi-sync commands, the start, stop, and the time sync signals. Send that to this IP address specifically, like I'm addressing mail to that individual house. Instead of just sending it out, shouting down the hallway for anybody who's listening, he's going to go tell that person directly, you need to start now. So if you have multiple, you'd want to turn that on and do unicast. I'll leave it on unicast, it doesn't matter. Some networks don't work well with multicast, specifically some Wi-Fi cloud mesh systems do not work well when doing multicast. So if you're running FPP remotes that aren't responding correctly, then you would check mark those remotes that you want to send to and then uncheck multicast. I think that was Pat. So thanks for the question, Pat.
Yep.
And just to verify now that I've switched that to unicast, I'm just going to real quickly fire this off as a play, make sure I'm still getting on my panels, which I am. I don't want to go to FPP settings, apologize, multi-sync. And you can see that he's actually playing. So unicast is working properly as well. So the real advantage of the player is not just being able to play individual sequences. I mean, we're taking through steps, right? So we were able to play our sequence in xLights output into our controllers. We were able to upload the configuration, upload everything onto the FPP player, and then we can play the sequences individually, but I want to be able to play the whole show. So next we're going to talk about playlists, then we're going to talk about schedules. But I didn't demonstrate yet, so I'm going to, before I get into playlists, I'm going to outputs. Move my Zoom window there. Go to output setup, channel outputs. You can now see that I have outputs defined that match what was in xLights. So this controller 1 is my Dragon 8. And you can see he's marked active because in xLights he was configured as active. The LED panel, which is my test Pi 0, he is not marked active because he was configured as xLights only in xLights, like we talked about before, where he's an FPP remote. We don't want to be outputting data to it. So this all got configured with that UDP out setting that we set when we did FPP Connect. Hopefully that makes sense. On test file manager, you can see the sequences and you can see the audio files. I don't have any videos or images or effects in here, so just sequences and audio for now. So content setup, playlists. So a playlist is where you kind of group different sequences together and different commands together that you want to have for your show. And you can have many playlists. You might have a playlist for like weekdays and a different playlist for weekends, or you can have like a playlist for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a different playlist for Tuesday, Thursday. But essentially, we're going to create a playlist, and I'm just going to say, call him Zoom class. Why not, right? And you can give him a full description if you want. I don't. When creating a playlist, you have this randomize option. Normally, most people like to set up their sequence of songs, which song plays first, second, third, etc., in a specific order because they want to build a show. If you just want it to randomize, when you create a playlist, you can create a playlist that will randomize once per load, which means when it starts that playlist, he'll randomize the order and play in a random order. or every iteration means that every time he cycles through the schedule and your playlist cycles through, he'll randomize every iteration. Now you might get 2 songs back to back, because what if Blinding Lights was the last random and then it's the first random the next time? And I only have 2 sequences we're talking about in this demo. So random really doesn't make sense. So typically we would do randomize off. There's a question from Right Family Lights about FPP supported for systems running in Kubernetes. If not, is there any development of that? So as a player, he has to play audio. So there is some work where FPP can be done in Docker, and I urge you to just go read about the Docker implementations on the FPP GitHub page. It is kind of complex and not standard, but in Docker, but I don't know that it would really be functional in Kubernetes. And you do have to be able to map in like networking and audio, and sometimes that can be a challenge depending upon your Docker configuration. But anyway, so we're going to create a new playlist, and I want to add this playlist. So, and thanks, Mark, for that answer too in there. So we got this Zoom class playlist now, and you'll notice that the playlist has 3 sections, right? There's a lead in, a main playlist, and a lead out. So the lead in is like your intro. So when your playlist starts, so let's say you set up a schedule. Let's say we're on a schedule from 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock. So at 5 o'clock, when the schedule starts, it will play your lead in. So anything that's in your lead in section, it will play one time at the beginning of the schedule. Then the main playlist will play in a loop fashion, start to finish in a loop over and over again for the duration of your schedule, from 5 to 10 in this example. And then your lead, when it hits 10 o'clock, then your lead out will play. That's like your outro. Not everybody uses lead in and lead out, but those are available if you want. And to get things in your playlist, you just add a sequence entry. And by default, it's assuming you're going to add a sequence and media entry type. So we can have the Blinding Lights audio or FSEQ with the media file. Make sure these match correctly that you expect. It's reading that through the FSEQ. And then you have a choice of either add or insert. Since this is the first item, they're both the same. If you go to insert, you can insert before selection or after selection. So I don't have anything already selected, so I'm just going to say after selection, right? No playlist selected, I know, right? Sorry. Blinding Lights, we're just going to add. So if I go to add another, I'm going to now choose my Light of Christmas, make sure your media file matches, and I'm going to insert before. And you can see now that put it in front. So if you add, it always goes at the tail end. Insert before selection or insert after selection lets you put things into place. You also have this handle over on the left, these little 6 dots. So I can drag this anywhere I want. You can drag that to change order. So now it's Light of Christmas. Now I'm going to put that below. Now it's Blinding Lights first. I can put Blinding Lights in the lead in. I can put Light of Christmas in the lead out. Now they're only going to play one time at the beginning, right? That's not really what I want, but that's how you would move things around, is by grabbing this handle and just clicking and dragging, right? I can add other types of entries, right? Some of this is described in the FPP manual. I won't go into detail over many of these, but you can branch into another playlist. You can do an FPP command. Any of the specific FPP commands, I can add that to a playlist entry, right? I can insert just an image to play over the effect. I can do a song only, a single file song only, the media file. I can insert a pause. I do use this from time to time, right? So let's take a 5-second pause, and I'm going to insert before selection. And it didn't like to insert. So why is my not liking me to add a pause? What's up? Okay. I'm going to save the playlist I have, refresh my web browser, go back in to edit the playlist, add a pause, 5 seconds, whatever time. I'll make a note of that. So add pause is not functioning now, even though I've used that many times in the past. Let me do an FPP command. Why not, right? All lights off. Let's add him at the end. So it added that fine. So it added a command type. I don't really want that right now. Interesting. It's not letting me add a pause. Okay. Sometimes I put a pause at the end of my playlist, so it'll play through the playlist, pause for 5 or 10 minutes, and then play through the playlist again. To kind of clear out traffic, right? So you can put pauses in there to help clear out traffic or get people to kind of move on down the road if you'd like, right? Paul Arizona asks, what if I want to do 4 20-minute sets? Paul, that can be done through the scheduler. So the scheduler, we'll talk a little bit about repeat options. And then the playlist is for grouping your sequences. Timing is handled by the scheduler. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Rick. And I know this is being recorded. I don't know that the chat would be recorded, which is why I'm kind of repeating some of that in chat. I know I'm doing that kind of quickly. Anyway, again, I want to say the playlist. So now I have a playlist, right, of my items that I wanted. And then I want to go into scheduler. So we're going to add a schedule, and we can certainly add many different schedules if you want, right? Let me select this and this. I don't really want to add all those schedules right now, so we're just going to focus on one. By default, the start date is going to be the day that you add it, and the end date would be some years down the road. If you wanted specific dates for this schedule to operate, like, for the first 2 weeks of December, you want to play one schedule, and for the third week of December, all the way through January 1st, maybe you want a different schedule. So you can pick and choose the days in which the schedule is effective. You can choose to be every individual day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There's like a Tuesday, Thursday. There's a Sunday through Thursday and a Friday through. So like weekday. I'm actually going to do this like a Sunday through Thursday, and then I'll come back and do like a Friday, Saturday. Odd and even can cause some confusion. Basically, that's the odd day in the count of days from the Linux epoch, which is January 1st, 1970. So if you're on like the 10,364th day since the epoch, then that's going to be even. Odd and even are used if basically you just want to alternate every other day. But like if this is the 13th, dates wise, well, it's actually like the 28th, right? So if it's the 28th, that's not necessarily even though the 28th is even. So when you pick what days you want, odd and even are, and basically it's an every other day. May not be actual based upon the current date. So I want to set this one up for, let's say, Sunday through Thursday. So Sunday through Thursday, I'm going to start, let's say, 5 o'clock p.m. So you can pick and choose like in half-hour increments, 7 o'clock, 7:30, whatever, or you can just type in here if you want. So if I can say 5 o'clock p.m., let's say I really wanted to start this at 5:07 p.m., right? I can't pick and choose, but you're welcome to type in there, right? And then what do I want to do with this schedule? Do I want to play a playlist? Do I want to do an individual sequence? Do I want to run an FPP command at this time? In this scenario, we're going to do a playlist, and I got the Zoom class playlist. But we're going to start at 5:07 p.m. The stop type, you have multiple stop types. Graceful means when I hit the end time of my schedule, I'm going to finish the current song, and then I'll quit. So even if I say end this at 10 p.m., it may not really quit till 10:02, right? Because he'll finish the current song and then quit. In fact, he'll finish the current song, go to that lead out we talked about, then quit. If I do graceful loop, then it's going to continue the current cycle through the playlist. So if I had like 20 minutes worth of sequences in my playlist and I'm on minute number 4 when I hit 10 o'clock p.m., it's going to go through 16 more minutes. It's going to finish that cycle through the entire playlist before it quits. If you're doing a show that kind of tells a story start to finish, then graceful loop may be what you really want, because you might not want it to end in the middle of a story, but you might run longer than your end time. Just be aware of that. And then of course, hard stop is at this 10 o'clock, I want to stop right now. I don't care what's going on, right? Sounds like a sprinkler system program or kind of similar probably. Yeah. And then you have a repeat option. I'll put this back on graceful. That's the pretty much the standard most people use. That way it'll complete the current song and then be done. Repeat, you can say repeat every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. One thing to be mindful is this is a repeat every 10 minutes from the start time. So let's say I put this on 5 minutes, right? Then it'll start at 5:07. Then at 5:12, it'll start. At like 5:17, it'll start. At like 5:22, it'll start. If my playlist is 20 minutes long, I'm never going to see anything more than 5 minutes of my playlist, because I'm going to start over every 5 minutes. This is not repeat after waiting 5 minutes from the end. So like for one of my Halloween shows, last year I had like a 21-minute playlist. So I would set it at repeat at 30 minutes. That way it would start at 5 o'clock. It would play for 20 minutes. Then it'd have a 10-minute break. Start at 5:30. 20 minutes of play, 10-minute break. Start at 6 o'clock. Start at 6:30. Part whatever. So that's what the repeat is for. Typically, this is on immediate, which just means you'll play through the playlist and it'll start over, play through the playlist, start over, play through the playlist, and it just goes through the playlist. Go ahead and save this schedule.
Ron, did you happen to mention how you can select certain holidays instead of an exact date for like holidays that fluctuate year to year?
By doing start date and end date.
Yeah, holiday option.
And then you can pick and choose specific holidays. Valentine's Day is not a great example of that, but example, Memorial Day, Memorial Day, Friday.
Thanksgiving, Easter.
Specify date, which gets it back to the date. You can say today, done, or select like the holidays, right? So Christmas is always a certain day, but Thanksgiving is just an example that might be on a different date from time to time. Don't go back to so yeah, thanks for reminder on doing that days. And you can do a day mask where you can pick and choose specific days, right? In this case, I was having this for my Sunday through Thursday. Because I happen to fall within this time frame, as soon as I save that schedule, you notice up here at the top it started playing. So it actually started playing as soon as I defined my schedule. Because I'm currently in the middle of that scheduled time, it started playing right away. Once you have a schedule up here on the status page, you can kind of see, you can extend it by 5 minutes. You can extend it by days. You can see when it started, when it's going to stop, what the next playlist is going to be. So next Thursday it's going to start again. I can manually stop it. It will show you now the next playlist is going to start on Thursday at 5:07 because that's where I set my schedule to. I can preview. So you can see when it's going to start, stop. By default, this gives you a couple weeks out. So when you preview, let me go ahead and add my other schedule in there. Then we'll go come back and I'm going to add a weekend schedule, right? So let's do a Friday, Saturday. Again, I'm going to start it at 5:07. I just picked a random time there, right? I'm going to do the Zoom class and I'm going to end this at like 11 p.m., right? So I'm going to run later on Friday and Saturday night than I do during the week. Save. So I've got two schedules here, right? Now these schedules don't happen to overlap, but if you had overlapping schedules, again, the same thing, you have handles here. You can drag them top and bottom, right? If a playlist time overlaps, items higher in the list have priority. So the one on the higher on the list will be priority over the other. Now, this particular schedule don't overlap. If I go back to the status page, I can do a preview again, and you can see I'm going to start on Thursday at 5:07 and end at 10. I'm going to start at Friday at 5:07, end at 11. Saturday, 5:07, end at 11. Sunday, 5:07, end at 10. Start, end, start, end, start, end. Is there a way to do like Thanksgiving +1 to start the reoccurring playlist every day, the day after Thanksgiving? That's a good question. I don't know for certain. I don't actually think so. So holidays, what's available in here? I have Thanksgiving. Where's Thanksgiving? I do have Black Friday as a holiday in there, right? So Black Friday is the day plus Thanksgiving. So you're limited to just what happens to be in here, right? So Black Friday happens to be the day after Thanksgiving. So yes, you can start on Black Friday.
There is a way that you could get around that, like Ron just mentioned with the priority. You could have one schedule end on Thanksgiving and have the other schedule start on Thanksgiving. But because the other one has higher priority, it will play when it starts.
Yeah. And I've got no Friday, Saturdays in here anymore because I set that Friday, Saturday to start on Black Friday, right? Actually go back to the scheduler. So there's some creative things you can do in scheduling. In your playlist, typically you can add pauses. Rick, did you notice I can't add a pause in the playlist?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So just we'll further troubleshoot that and we'll make sure that gets corrected if possible. If you notice, what I'm running in here is 6.3-10. That's the most current version of 6.3. That's the current released version. FPP 7 will be releasing pretty shortly. The beta images are out now, and I know it's targeted for mid-July for the production release. All indications is going to make that. I don't know that it will. There's no pending big things that I'm aware of that are going to stop that release. Obviously, if we find them, then we'll adjust the schedule and working with the developers and stuff. That's kind of the gist. So we'll play this schedules. If you want to see the schedule actually start, let me come back into the scheduler and let me actually set this. Right now, I've got 8:01 p.m. So I'm just going to set this like 8:03 p.m. and save. Go back to the status page. And you can see it's scheduled to start at 8:03. Right now it's 8:01:14. I guess I could have set that for 8:02. Set this volume back up so we'll be able to hear when it starts. And then I'll just open the door for any other questions or anything, any of the other helpers or anybody thinks I might have missed or want to expand upon. I know we went through a lot of stuff really fast, but what is that, 8 o'clock? Yeah, we're right on about an hour. So that's kind of what I anticipated.
How would you do remote Falcon where people can make a request?
Yeah, so I know that they did a full gem session on remote Falcon somewhat recently. That's on the YouTube page, and I think there's another session scheduled to come up. So within remote Falcon, it kind of has its own scheduling and it has its own voting and its own jukebox method. And I don't have remote Falcon set up in here at all, and so I'm not prepared to talk about that in depth.
Right. I'm not talking about doing remote Falcon via the webpage. I'm just talking about how do you instigate it in Falcon Pi Player as a plugin?
Correct.
Yeah,
so
it's just a plugin.
So we will talk more about plugins in the advanced class, but remote Falcon, there is a plugin that you would install and then you would configure that. So you'd go through the remote Falcon website. There's a whole setup procedure. You create an account, you install this plugin, and you would actually have to create a specific playlist for remote Falcon. And then that playlist is what you configure in remote Falcon. You would not, let me just, as an example, add this blinding lights in here real quick, just have a playlist. So you would never actually, 8:03 must have hit 8:03 in 6 seconds because it just started. If you look at my camera view, you can see everything going on, and then you got the audio going in the background too. So the scheduler started when I told it to. Anyway, sorry about that interruption. And so your playlist that you use for remote Falcon for your list of items that are available, you would never want to schedule that playlist. So the Remote Falcon playlist that would have all your items that you want to be choosable within the Remote Falcon platform, you would never add that as a schedule. So you have to have multiple playlists, one that and they can contain the same songs, right? So they can effectively be the same contents in the playlist, but they do need to be a separate playlist. And John Larson mentions in chat that the Remote Falcon class in detail will be on July 26th. But hopefully that kind of answers your quick question. Yes, there's a plugin that adds functionality into FPP. There's several plugins that are out there and available. Some of these are older, some of them are newer. But Remote Falcon, you can just search and then you would install that plugin.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
And the wiki on the web page is very well written. He did a really good job on updating all the information and everything on there.
So great question by B. Bollinger. Would you recommend FPP to run a separate Pi or in use on a controller like a Colt K16 AB? I have a spare Pi, but was planning on doing it all on the BeagleBone unless I'm limiting myself. So you will have different opinions on this topic. My recommendation is always, especially if you have a Pi, to have separate the role from controller and player. So I would recommend personally to have a separate Pi as your player and then have your Colt K16 in this case as a controller and have it dedicated controller. And I'll go into a little discussion of why I choose that. Can you use the Colt K16 as an all-in-one? Absolutely. And in fact, the K16 actually has onboard audio. So it actually has an audio jack that really enables that functionality. So it can be an all-in-one, yes. The BeagleBone device itself that's on that K16 is a single core processor, about 700 megahertz. The CPU processor is probably 15 years old or better by now. It's a low processor unit. The advantage of the BeagleBone Black to drive pixels is they have two real-time processing units on that board that make the 2811 signal and the timing, because that's very timing dependent. So the BeagleBones control pixels excellent. When you do the player and the audio and the web interface and all that other stuff going on one device, that CPU may run a lot higher CPU. If that CPU, let's say, if you got 3,000 or 4,000 pixels on your K16, go for it, no problem. If you've got 20 or 40,000 pixels driven by that K16, you might encounter periods of 100% CPU utilization, and you might have lagging and times where your show seems like pause and stop and stutter because that CPU might be taxed out at the maximum. If you got a small to average show, handful of thousands of pixels, 4,000 or 5,000 pixels, probably run great. And at the end of the day, your mileage may vary. It just depends on your show and your content and what all you're doing at. But if you start adding plugins like Remote Falcon and start adding other plugins and other features and other functionality, that's just a lot for that BeagleBone processor to really handle. So my preference is to keep the show player separate from the controller, but you certainly don't have to. Hopefully it answers your question. Okay, Bollinger. If you have a Pi available, there's no need not to, right? The only limitation would be your audio source, your play the audio. Joe says is the class recorded? It should be yes. I believe John Larson has that recording. Thank you, John Larson. Yes, it is. Doesn't look like it is. Who's recording? He's recording externally. He's not recording it in Zoom. Pretty sure he's recording it in OBS or something. Anyway, cool. And he'll post to the Facebook and the official xLights page, and the recording will be provided to the team that can upload to the xLights gems. For those who are not aware yet, and YouTube, you can just search xLights gems. There's a gems channel that has all our previous recordings and stuff in it since we started this year. I know that there was one in here basically on Remote Falcon 10 months ago. So there is a video here on Remote Falcon. I'm pretty sure James Vance, the creator of Remote Falcon, did that video. But there's another class coming up as well, July 26th, I was told. Good questions, good comments. Any other questions, comments?
All right, I want to thank you for it. It's a good basic beginning class, and In a couple weeks, we'll learn a little bit more about the advanced side of FPP.
Yeah. So a couple weeks will be Rick with FPP 7. Feel free to tune in on that. I believe that's July 12th. He'll go over FPP 7, and that's right before the Christmas Expo event that will be in Lexington, Kentucky. I will be in Lexington, Kentucky, so if anyone's on here going to be in there, feel free to find me. I'll be probably working in the Matos Designs booth most of the weekend, so feel free to come look me up. And then July 19th, the following week, right after Christmas Expo, is when we'll go through an FPP advanced class. And we'll talk about things like GPIO input triggers, GPIO outputs for like driving relays. We'll talk about command presets. Talk a little bit, we'll go over some output processors. And I know I had that media advanced, something else on the topic. We'll talk about plugins. We'll configure like the big buttons plugin and talk about a little bit about scripts and stuff that allow to extend the functionality of FPP. So that would be, if any of those topics interest you, feel free to tune in to this channel this time on July 19th for the advanced class. Where can one find a schedule of topics and dates? Great question. Let's hit Facebook real quick. And it's, who knows what's going to show up on my Facebook, right? So it's always a gamble when being recorded here, or xLights official support group. So if you're not a member of the official xLights support group, that's a great group to be a member of. It's a very active group, lots of people in there. You come to the group page and then events. So we try to keep an event created in here. So right now we have the FPP Basic as a player, FPP 7, FPP Advanced. Then we'll have Remote Falcon by James, the creator of Remote Falcon, importing mapping sequences. John's going to do that one. And then set up your lighting network. No, that was created by John. I'm not sure who's doing that one.
Michael's doing that one.
Michael Soffergan from
Yep.
Showstopper Sequences. He does an excellent job of importing and mapping conversations. Yep. And then setting up your lighting network. This is really just a general network primer. We'll talk about things like IP addresses, what makes IP address work and how to address things. We'll talk about show networks and stuff, but this is really a basic network primer. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in August. So. Yeah, that's where you would go to find a list of things that are coming up. You're welcome, Bob.
Any other questions?
And this guy right here that did this installing FPP video I shared earlier, that's the Rick you've heard talking in here a little bit every once in a while. So Rick Harris, the co-author and primary author, I would say primary author, co-author of the FPP support manual. Good comment. So FPP, from any FPP instance, if you go to help, FPP manual, that'll take you to the specific manual for the version of xLights that you're running. And that'll open up a PDF manual. And so that's the quick way of getting to the FPP manual. If you already have FPP up and running, just go to help, FPP manual, written by Rick Harris, contributed by Mark Amber. So lots of great content and detail in the manual, and my internet's super slow because I got multiple things going tonight. Yeah, thanks, Phil. And a separate show network is not usually needed at all. In fact, 99% of the time, that's not required. People create separate show networks when they don't need to and add complexity to their show. We'll talk a little bit about that in the networking class, and we can talk about it in the advanced a little bit as well too, if you like. But yeah, holy cow, that was slow internet to load this PDF. It's coming from GitHub, I think, right? No, Falcon Christmas, GitHub IO. Anyway, I'll return the room back to normal operation, and obviously if anybody has other questions or anything, as long as I'm in here, feel free to just pipe up. I'll be glad to answer. Later, turn off the camera. You don't need to be looking at my mess.
Thank you again, Ron.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, absolutely. Glad to host. Hopefully it went well.